Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Jean-Jacques Rousseau talking about the moral education. And we saw that his view in regards to the question of, what is human nature, he takes the view of the noble savage, that people are basically good. And then we looked at a couple of his other works briefly about inequality and so forth. Now, as I mentioned when we left off last time, we were looking at his discourse on inequality, and we noted that he laid out a fairly early conspiracy theory, that the original social contract was created by the rich and powerful in order to dupe everyone else into being locked into a system of inequality. Now, he proposes a solution to this, and in his work, The Social Contract, he lays out that solution. Now, The Social Contract is probably his best known work. Still influential today in political science and philosophy, of course. So, what was going on in there? Well, he does address the question about how things go bad. Because again, he believed that, or seemed to believe that people are basically good. And if you believe people are basically good, a good question is, how do they slide from being basically good into badness? And here's his answer. He claims that the state of nature, which is for the most part, a construct that involves considering hypothetically or actually what would things be like if there was no government, authority, police, etc. And what he claims is the original state of nature degenerates into a lawless state, devoid of morality. Mm-hmm. And this is the beginning of the Troubles. And as he sees it, here's how the Troubles get going. Once we're in, at least according to his theory, in this lawless state devoid of morality, then we start to need laws in order for us to survive. And we end up in a scenario in which we're in competition with each other, yet we're also dependent on each other to survive. In many ways, it's kind of similar to how we may see things today. We're in competition with each other over, fame, resources, jobs, etc. But of course, we're also kind of dependent on each other. We got people who have to grow food, build buildings, all the stuff that we depend on others for. So here's his solution to the problem. Like many other thinkers, including we looked at our good dead friend Thomas Hobbes, but also a person we'll look at later, a good dead friend John Locke, he proposes a social contract. And here's the idea. The contract gives us two benefits. One, we don't die. Well, we die eventually, but enables us to survive. Secondly, it enables us to have liberty, a degree of freedom. How does this work? Well, Rousseau came up with this notion, part of the thing he's most famous for, called the general will, which is similar to the notion of the will of the people. If you follow politics at all, either out of choice or because it's kind of unavoidable this time of year, well, the election's coming up in a year, you probably hear people talking about the will of the people. So what does Rousseau mean by the general will, and how does this enable us survival and liberty? Well, here's his answer. By submitting to the general will, we are free in the sense that we're not subordinated to the wills of other individuals. Which in a way, some might say, but if we're submitting to the general will, aren't we doing just that? But his answer would be no, it's the general will, not the individuals. And he claims it ensures that people will follow the general will because we're all authors of this contract. So, like many other thinkers like John Locke, he believes that sovereignty, the rule, falls with the people. So what did he mean by this general will? Well, one way to look at it is in kind of an odd metaphysical way, that there is like this collective, almost panpsychic will. If you watch science fiction at all, if you ever saw like the Star Trek The Next Generation, they had the Borg, which are linked, in that Borg consciousness. And that can be seen as kind of an awful version of the general will. One will ruling all, the individuals are just components of it. Now what he seemed to have in mind, maybe to make it seem perhaps nicer, is the idea that collectively we would make decisions about things, and his thought was the general will of the people, our general deciding, if it wasn't like sidetracked and perverted or corrupted, would end up with good solutions to problems. And of course, a good question would be, is he right about that? Now, interestingly enough, it does turn out that he did have some merit in this view. How so? Well, you might have heard the expression wisdom of the crowds, which may seem kind of odd because we often think of crowds as being awful, but there's a truth to that. There have been various and sundry studies aimed at trying to determine, is this actually correct? Do people working together, say towards ideologically neutral goals like solving problems, etc., does the wisdom of the crowd work out? And the answer is, in general, if it's not like ideological, it generally does. And I'll use a straightforward example. Everyone's probably seen it like a fair or school event where they have you like guess the number of jelly beans like in a jar. You get like a ticket you can guess. Well, at some state fairs, they have the game of guessing the weight of a cow. And you guess how heavy the cow is. And what they found is that if you take the average of like all the guesses, it tends to be really close. Because what happens is everybody sort of pulls like what they know, and extremes get kind of worked out, and it ends up being pretty accurate. And out of curiosity, some of the statistics did that. And the same thing sort of applies to solving other problems as well. In general, again, if people aren't, motivated by like agendas, etc., and they're just trying to solve a problem, in general, the general will seems to kind of work out. Another illustration can be seen in the animal kingdom. For example, everyone's familiar with ants. They all kind of work together. Individually, of course, how smart are ants individually?
I think they're very smart.
Well, but it's an individual. Suppose you just said like one ant.
No.
Yeah, I mean, not super smart. Enough to like, wander around, find stuff, bite people, that kind of stuff. Yeah, but collectively, they're very good. I mean, they build, what amount of cities, they engage in agriculture, they raise, some of them raise crops, they engage in warfare, etc. And how do they do that? Well, the answer is, in a way, kind of like a general will. Working together, they form like a collective consciousness. Bees kind of do the same thing. And so Rousseau seemed to be onto something, this general will. And as I mentioned, studies and so forth have shown that we can do this too. Now, Rousseau was well aware that politics can become corrupted. And here's where it was that people would sort of mislead the general will, so people would make bad decisions, which is always a practical problem. There's a question of, is what the people want, is that a good thing? And how do you ensure that, you're really getting what the people want? They're not being misled, corrupted, etc. Now, his practical implementation worked like this. The government, for him, is supposed to implement and enforce the general will. But he believed in a fairly small government, that there'd be a small number of magistrates and there would be direct creation of laws, as opposed to what we have. In the United States, we have a representative democracy. We vote for people who vote on laws, for the most part. So, for example, here in Florida, if you're a resident of Florida, if you vote for representatives in the House and Senate here in Florida. They create laws, and we vote for House and Senate for the Congress, and they create laws. Rousseau was not in favor of that. He favored people would directly create laws. Now, interestingly and morally enough, of course, with a big country, that can be kind of impractical. How do you get everybody to work on this? And people have argued in recent days that with the advent of the web, etc., we could actually do this. We could all go on the web and create and vote on laws. And some people think that would be good, and other people who have been on the internet, especially Twitter and Reddit, would think that would be just horrifying. But we'll see. So what was his view of moral education? Well, we now turn to that. He wrote a semi-fictitious work about a young boy being educated by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, one of the key things about his view of moral education ties back into his view about humans being naturally good. And he thinks that people should be raised, moral educated, not in the city, but in the country. Why? Because he thinks that's a more natural environment, and that the city is corrupting, potentially harmful. Now again, this ties back in the narrative I mentioned before, something we still hear to this day, that the rural areas are good, wholesome, American, and the cities are corrupted. And there are various, tales of that, famous, stories and movies, which involve, the person goes off to the city, they're a good, rural person, but then they encounter the corruption of the city. And in movies with unhappy endings, they're destroyed by the city. In movies with happy endings, they leave the city, go back and realize there's no place like home. Education, as he sees it, involves learning how to live. And the way it should be done, according to him, is by following a guardian who should show you the path to this living. So to turn now to a bit of the excerpt, here's how it goes. Now it begins by noting, as we saw before, that he thinks people are basically good. So he says, coming from the hands of the Creator, all things are good. So then, how do things go bad? Well, his answer is us. Now that does create a bit of a problem, potentially a paradox. If everything created is good, and presumably we're good, how do we make things go bad? But he claims that we do. That we degenerate and corrupt everything. For example, one thing he says, which when I first read it I thought, what a weird thing to say, but it turns out to be actually correct. What he says is this. He says that we oblige one soil to nourish the production of another, and one tree to bear the fruits of another. I thought that was kind of odd, then I thought, oh, maybe I should research that. Turns out he's right. What he has in mind is what people can do and have done is you can actually take like trimmings off one tree. And in theory, you could take, if it was compatible, you could take like an apple tree, snip off some apple branches, and then graft them onto like an orange tree or some other tree, and graft them in, they'll grow into it, and you can make the tree grow fruit it would otherwise not grow. And before we had genetic engineering, people would do that. They'd graft, from one tree to another. And today, of course, we can totally top that because we have genetic engineering. And Rousseau, given his horror at, that kind of tree splicing, he'd probably be terrified by genetic engineering. And he notes about how we, do all kinds of stuff. Now, if you're still looking for a paper topic, one potentially interesting one may tie into Rousseau's view. Rousseau's view is that we corrupt and harm nature. And of course, today we're doing all kinds of stuff. We have genetically modified foods, genetically modified other organisms, for other purposes. For example, when they've done is they've grown like a human ear on a mouse. And in part to see if they could do it, but also if we could grow like human organs and stuff on other animals, we could just harvest them out of the animal. Like a pig that has like a human heart, eat a heart, take it out of the pig, cook some bacon, put the heart in, and you're all set. You can serve the person, give them a heart, then they destroy it with bacon, they can eat the bacon, and then the heart of the pig. They can be bacon, I guess, technically speaking. And so, interesting, potential paper topic could be on that. Is such modification morally okay? And Rousseau, of course, thought no. So his answer to the question of how does it all go bad, his claim is the answer is us. We make it all go bad. So is he right? Are we the reason we can't have nice stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. If it wasn't for us, we could have nice stuff. Now, so what about the moral education stuff? Well, he begins this second part by noting that we do need education because we are born with 3 defects: weakness, we're destitute, and born stupid. So we need strength, assistance, and judgment. So we have those 3 needs to be taken care of. So he thinks education, not surprisingly, since we have 3 needs, coincidentally, he believes that there are three sources of education. One is from nature, teaches us. The second is other people, and thirdly, from other circumstances. And he claims that's how we'll learn stuff. Nature, from other people, from circumstances. Now, in terms of how this works, his claim is this. Unlike Aristotle, in Aristotle's view, as we saw, was the way moral education should work, for Aristotle, is the state uses its compulsive power to make people good. It gets them at an early age, habituates them so they find it less irksome, monitors the rest of their life, and then using its compulsive power and its supposedly, superior, practical wisdom, guides people from birth to death. Rousseau offers an alternative viewpoint. His view is what we should do is look at how nature goes and follow the paths of nature. So Aristotle is very much about imposing from the outside. The state needs to regulate, needs to control, needs to compel. Whereas Rousseau, his view is that we should look at nature, and nature will provide us with this guide. And in kind of a harsh view, he says nature is cruel, essentially, but fair, but mostly cruel. And he claims that the trials and tribulations of nature will strengthen the children by ordeals and will teach them what pain and trouble mean. And according to some accounts, Rousseau advocated actually setting traps for children. Not like lethal traps, like Temple of Doom style traps, but things that would teach them that life is pretty harsh, which does seem a bit harsh. So he does go through and lays out in great detail, how this will progress through each of the different ages, and he believes there'd be like an education from age up until 10 to 12, and then beyond that. But I won't grind through all those particular details. But sort of the gist for Rousseau is this. People are born basically good, but then we wreck everything, and so how are we going to avoid falling into corruption and degeneracy? Well, the solution is we have to get the kids out of the city, get them into nature. Will they be guided by an appropriate guardian along basically the natural paths? So instead of, Aristotle's view, a strict moral education guided by the state, basically there'll be sort of a natural upbringing, and he believes that people will sort of by nature follow those paths, guided by an appropriate, teacher. But it's primarily people are naturally good, and so we essentially have to just keep them from getting into corruption and guide them. So is he right about that? Would that work? Well, this one question is kind of a theoretical question. In theory, would that work? If you took, this is what he proposed. So you get a kid, you take the kid out of the city, and you take him to the country. If it's not, or she is not already there, they're given, a guardian is assigned, and the kid goes out, experiences nature, and learns that life is pretty rough, and nature is cruel but fair. I imagine encounters of like fire ants and probably non-poisonous snakes and maybe some coyotes or something. So is he right? Would that work? Well, do we have things today that do see the value of getting kids to nature to learn stuff?
Boy Scouts.
Yeah, we got the Boy Scouts, who are apparently very good at fighting zombies now. Upcoming movie, which is a useful skill. That's probably a badge, zombie fighting badge. Yeah, we have the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Get out in the wild. There's also in cities I think they still have it, but they have the Outward Bound program, where people who are in the cities, have shown a lot of non-city stuff, would go and experience the joys of the wild. So, does that have some merit to it? Oops. No one ever calls me usually. Usually just turn it off because I just don't get calls. And usually it's just the department chair or someone that calls me. And then I forget to turn it off for like months at an end. It just never rings, except for this one time, like right now. But yeah, I should have turned it off. I am sorry, but again, usually no one ever calls me. I haven't turned it off for like a year because no one calls. That's so sad.
You want to answer?
I do not. I do
No.
not. Because it's never anybody I want to talk to. Oh, God. They're always trying. It's always someone trying to like sell me something, some kind of thing.
That's sad.
Hmm?
I said that's sad.
It is sad. No, I just use email. I just.
Oh, okay.
Well, when I first got a phone, my friends were like, you gotta get a. I didn't have a phone at all in grad school. People were like, you gotta get a phone. We got only phones. And then I could get a mobile phone. And they said, get a mobile phone. I said, yeah, I get a mobile phone. I said, why can't we call? I said, I didn't activate it. Like, you didn't activate it. I said, okay, I activated it. And they're like, what's your number? Oh, I don't know. And then eventually I did get the phone and gave them my number, but I encourage people to never call me. Just, email. It's better that way. It's just phone, so I just don't, I use a lot of words teaching. I only have so many words and I run out, so I can't talk. I can't word the words by talking. I better get back to this because otherwise I'll run out of words. Yeah, so we do think, we do have programs to get people out into the woods and the wild, and we think that has some value. So abstractly, you might say, yeah, there's some merit to that there is some value to getting out into the wild. And interestingly, boringly enough, there's a book written fairly recently, got on the New York Times bestseller list, so I know about it. I think it was called something like How to Raise a Wild Child. Not in the sense of like, crazy child, but in the sense of like getting them out in the woods and so forth. It's just things that, parents have always said. They talk about how like when they were kids, they were out in the, out in the woods, roughing it, and kids today just sit in front of their tablets and their Xboxes and stuff, need to get out, in the wild, get outdoors. And it's basically tapping back into Rousseau's, argument that, proper education is in the wild. I guess that coyotes will teach us some things. Now, there's also, of course, the practical thing. Would that be practical to take the kids out into the wild and have them each kid have a guide that would guide them through this wilderness development? Would that be a practical thing to do?
What was your question?
There's also the practical question. Would it be practical to follow Rousseau's method of moral education of, getting the kids or a kid, taking them out to the wild, nature, and having someone guide them through this moral development? What would be some practical concerns with that?
Danger.
Yeah. Yeah, there's coyotes, stranger danger in the form of coyotes, and they're pretty strange. Or who knows what else is out there.
Would they have resources such as food, water?
You're going to be estranged to another way of life afterwards.
Yeah, if they go back to the, city, there'd be the question of like, could they readjust from surviving the coyotes and the snakes and stuff, getting back to the city? And there's also the concern of, what other type of stuff would they be, presumably you'd have to teach them other things like math and geometry and, and so forth as well. But it's kind of an interesting proposal. So we have these two kind of extremes. Aristotle's view, a very rigid system of moral education, ideally controlled by the state, basically the system that the odds are I grew up in, you probably grew up in too, K through 12, enforced education, living now in a system of laws. We live in Aristotle's world in many ways. And then Rousseau offers like a more natural, freer system, a back to nature approach. And as mentioned, people are still arguing for this today, so he has a very substantial influence. And so it's kind of a choice between the very rigid system of Aristotle and the one involving coyotes that Rousseau proposes. Before pressing on to our next section, which is looking at the issue of equality, anything about moral education that needs more stuff? Okay, so now we began with why be good, we turned to making people good, and now we turn to equality. Now, equality has long been a point of contention and concern, and there are various definitions of equality. Now, in various fields of equality, for example, we might talk about today, one of the big issues that we've been following, we've been feeling the burn or the chillery. Burn, chillery, Hillary.
Oh, yeah.
This is why I don't quit my day job. I thought about going on Comedy Central, but they said they'd call me. I get where they were. I should have checked. They could have been Comedy Central calling me. I could have given them my own show. Now, we have, Bernie addressing the issue of income inequality. And so one concern is equality of income. There's also things like legal equality. We're supposed to be legal under the law, but it's a fair question to ask, is that really true? Does money, class, race matter? And the answer seems to be, well, yeah. There's also the notion of, moral equality, about people being morally equals. And so there's all sorts of, types of equality. Legal equality, income equality, equalities of power. And of course, we also have different concepts of what we mean by equality. There is, two of the main ones are these. One is what is often described as equality of opportunity. And the idea there is basically, in its ideal, it's kind of a competitive equality. In the ideal, it can be, an analogy can be drawn between equality of opportunities, say in economics or education, etc., by drawing an analogy to, let's use like a 5K, because I like to run stuff. Now, in the ideal, of course, a 5K provides perfect equality of opportunity. How so? Well, everybody has the same starting line. And if you're doing a race that's chip time, the timer doesn't start for you until you cross the start. They have mats there, and it triggers when you start. So if you're in the back, and you got quite a ways to go, you get a same starting time. And then of course everybody has to do the same course. So you're all running the same hills, under the same conditions, the same access to water and Gatorade and so forth. And everyone has to run. People can't use skateboards or motorcycles or hoverboards or something. So in the ideal, it provides an analogy, an illustration of a perfect equality of opportunity. Everyone has the same starting point, and everybody has to run the same course, everyone has to compete equally, and the end result, though, because equality of opportunity means everyone has the same fairness of competition, but of course the end results could be very unequal. And 5K provides a good illustration. You'll usually have someone who'll do the 5K really fast, like maybe 15 minutes or sub 15, and they'll win. They'll get like a big trophy, or maybe a very small trophy, or maybe a coffee mug. Then you have other people who run like in 18 minutes, and, the 19, 20, 22, 30 hour, etc. And so there'll be a very, in terms of coming across the finish, there'll be a great deal of, in a way, inequality. Some people will be really fast, they'll get, maybe a nice trophy. Other people are really slow, they might get nothing but the t-shirt. And of course, the oranges and bagels afterwards. So equality of opportunity is the idea that, in the ideal, everyone has the same starting point, and the conditions are fair. Everyone has to go through the same sort of competition, even though the ultimate results may be very unequal. Another example would be like ideally a class is the same way. Everyone has the same access to the tests. Everyone has the same access to the exams. Everyone has the same access to office hours, to assistants, etc. And so everyone comes in, the same starting point. And then there'll be an unequal distribution of grades, some A's, some B's, some C's, some D's, some F's. But as long as everyone has the same opportunity, there's not like, you have to pay like extra for like access to office hours, or you have to pay like an extra fee to, get more time on the test. Actually, I shouldn't say this. It'll probably become part of. They'll probably start selling that. It'll be like like with the online, or like with the games, like with the app, so you can like do premium purchases. Maybe they'll start that. They'll be like, hey, we can get our funding up that way, selling extra stuff. But the idea, of course, is supposed to be this equal competition, but the end result could be quite unequal. And so that's equality of opportunity. Now, do we have equality of opportunity in the land of equality of opportunity? Supposedly.
Supposedly.
Yeah, supposedly. Because in theory, we have, everyone gets access to K-12 education. As I say, anybody can be president. You just have to be a natural citizen, And you just have to be, there's only two requirements. You gotta be a national American, and you gotta be old enough. That's it. There's no qualifying exam. And you can, well, there's also like the money requirement, et cetera, but that's informal. Yes, you might say we do have this equality of opportunity. People can go from humble beginnings to great riches. But are there critics who consider that we don't really have true equality of opportunity? Well, does everyone have the same access to schooling, the same quality schools? No. I mean, anybody who, talks to anybody like about, buying or selling houses, everyone who's involved in housing knows there are good school districts. They know that they want, like friends of mine have done this. They buy a house that's probably more expensive than they can really afford because they want to be in a good school district so their kids can go to a good school. They don't want to go to a place with a bad school because they know what that involves. And so yeah, if you've got the money to afford to live in a good neighborhood, you can go to a good school. If you don't, you'll probably go to a much worse school. Yes, not the same opportunity there. Also, what about the starting line? Do we all start, just like a 5K? Do we all start right at that start? And it's like, you start at 0 and it's like, go, go, go. No, I mean, some people start off with clear advantages. The accumulation of wealth. Some people start off in very wealthy families, so they get to start way ahead. Other people, no, so they start way behind. And of course, that income does make a huge difference. To use a concrete example, FAMU, as you might know, is under the performance-based funding, just like all of these state schools in Florida. And our funding depends on basically factors like graduation rate, our salaries of our graduating people who graduate, and job placement, etc. Basically, economic success of our graduates. Now, you could say, well, that's a fair competition, because all the schools are competing to see who can graduate, the highest percentage of people, have the highest incomes. But is there a fair situation, an equal start? Well, one thing is, interestingly enough, that under the performance-based funding we have, the state set up, FAMU is the worst. We're getting specked in the face, basically. It's awful. But there was a mobility, social mobility index ranking of all the schools in the United States. Guess what FAMU is? Number 19 of all the schools. We are ahead of all the other schools in Florida, and we're one of the top in the country. Why? Well, because the measure is differently. FAMU has the high percentage of low-income students, predominantly, but we have a low graduation rate. But the income level of students has a huge impact on graduation rate. Why? Well, you all know. If you don't have a parent that's paying for your school, what do you got to do? You got to work, and work takes time, lots of time. And that interferes with being able to go to class and do the work. And of course, even if you work hard, school is super expensive. It's ridiculously expensive. And so, even if you're working full time, you might not be able to make enough money to pay for it. You can't pay for school, you can't finish. And so, in terms of fairness, well, if you start off with from an upper income family, your chance of getting a good school, being able to go to college, pay for college and finish, much higher. If you're not from a high income family, then your chance is much lower. So very different opportunities there. Yeah, and so those are, even if we claim equality of opportunity, we clearly haven't got that. Now, one of the big issues coming up in the presidential election is that issue. As I mentioned, you have Bernie Sanders talking about income inequality. The Republicans are talking about it as well. And it's both a political and moral issue. What, if anything, should we do about this inequality in regards to inequality of opportunity? So I guess one question is, should anything be done morally? Or should we just say, some people argue, life's not fair. For real, that is a stark argument against inequality. Life is not fair, just tough it out. Is that fair? Is that a reasonable reply? Life's not fair, so equality of opportunity is here to stay. Just, tough it out. Yeah, why wouldn't that be, like, why isn't the claim life isn't fair? Why wasn't that a good reply?
It's not like good. It's an excuse, I guess, not a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that on one hand, life isn't fair. Some people are born with better, you know, like, we can go back to our 5K. Some people are born like naturally really fast. Other people, they can train every day and they're still gonna be slow. That's not fair. But without genetic engineering, not much we can do about it. But what about our social stuff? Is just saying it's not fair, is that a good excuse? I mean, imagine I set up the class, like, go jokingly, I said, you know, we could do like a thing where, you know, you have like a freemium version of the class where you get like the basic, but then you could buy like extra stuff. So like for extra money, you could get the notes. For even more money, you could get access to sample questions. For more money, you could come to my office hours. For even more money, you could get like booster packs to your grades. Now, suppose someone says, hey, I can't afford all that stuff, this isn't fair. Would it be fair to say to that person, life isn't fair. If you're rich, you do well in my class. If you're not, tough luck. It's not. No, because the core, who's in charge of the class in terms of setting all that up? Yeah, so it's not fair, whose fault is it? Me. Yeah, I could do something about that. Yeah, so when it comes to stuff in life, yeah, reality is not fair. True. You know. But who creates society? Yeah, we do. And so it's not fair, whose fault is it? It's us. We make it unfair. And so the idea when people say life isn't fair, I mean, they're right, but if it's unfair, that's because we make it so. And it's it's an important political question. Should we do something about that? And, yeah, morally. And I mean, if you're looking for, if you haven't got a paper topic yet, that's a pretty good, paper topic. Assuming that our system isn't fair, morally, should we do something about that? And some people argue that Bernie Sanders, for example, argues we should. Other people argue that we should do something about it, but maybe not as much as Bernie would do. And some people argue we should, the life isn't fair thing. We shouldn't do anything. Now, a second type of equality is not about opportunity. It's not about the chance to, succeed or fail. It's the idea of sort of like true equality, in the sense of that all things are to be equal. So this would be the case of what you'd actually do instead of saying, okay, here's a starting line, start running. You have an unequal distribution. The idea of sort of the second type of equality would be actually making things equal. To go into a sporting analogy, it'd be like you have a race, but everyone gets a medal. There's no first place, there's no last place. Everyone gets medals. Everyone is equal. Now, to use another, to use like an actual example, it'd be sort of, think of like the way sort of like communist countries are portrayed as being, although not really. Like where everyone would have the same income and the same possessions. Everyone would have the same stuff. So it's total equality. To use a science fiction example, which is kind of extreme, there's a classic sci-fi story called Harrison Bergeron. And it's about a dystopian America set in the future, where equality is the order of the day, enforcement equality. And the idea is that everyone has to be equal. And so what they do is if someone is, say, smart, fairly smart, they put an implant in the person's ear, so whenever they're trying to think, it just disrupts them. It like makes a little noise, so they can't focus. So it brings their intelligence down to average. If someone is, some people are better looking than others, everyone has to wear a mask, so no one is better looking or worse looking. If someone is very graceful and strong, they're weighted down with bulky, cumbersome clothing, so they're not, more graceful than others. And the main character in the story, Harrison Bergeron, is an exceptional person. So they've got, he's all covered in weights and has like a big zapping helmet on his head to keep zapping him. And the story, he breaks free of this, and then he's freeing like some other people, And people are seeing, for the first time, people who aren't perfectly equal. And then the Minister of Equality comes out, kills the people with a shotgun, and boom, everything's back to normal. And so that's kind of the horrifying perfect equality that's part of dystopian societies. Now, would making things equal, would that always be bad? Yeah, maybe in some cases, like if we were all had to if we did that, like Harrison Bergeron's scenario, that'd be pretty horrifying. Because no one could be different or exceptional. That seems, horrible. It's basically pounding everybody, down. What about other stuff? Should people, for example, have equal access to education? The same. Not in a sense like having to, a free market to see if you can pay for better schools, you can get it. But should everyone have equal opportunity to education or equal access?
Yes.
I think, what's the word? You might say, what's the worst that could happen in that case? Yeah, so there's some things we might regard as we would want equality of opportunity. So if someone could be smarter or faster, we wouldn't want to hammer them down. But we may think there are some things that should be, equal. That if you're a member of society, everyone should get that stuff. And people propose different things. For example, again, if you're looking for a topic, there's been a proposal to have free four-year college. I mean, someone's going to pay for it, but the idea would be there'd be tuition free. And the idea is that you would, once you graduate and you're working, you pay taxes. That would pay off the school. And so in that case, basically it would be equal education. Everybody who wanted to could go to college, free school. It'd be equal, because right now, schools vary a great deal in their cost. Harvard's pretty expensive, Yale's pretty expensive, TCC pretty inexpensive. But you could have all public schools be equal. They all cost exactly the same, which would be free. And people have proposed that. So a potentially interesting topic might be, should four-year education be free for students? Some people have proposed two-year community college free, or more subsidies and support. And the argument there is to give people more equality of opportunity. That way people can get education. Yeah, so there's considerable debate throughout history, especially now, about those questions about equality. What things should we aim for equality in? What things should we actually sort of impose equality? And what things should we not? And one way to look at the upcoming election in the political ideology is sort of how people view that equality. In the ideal, for example, conservatives present themselves as defenders of equality of opportunity, that people should have the chance to, become, billionaires and rise up, but they don't want to have forced equality because they don't want to push everybody down to a lower level. But of course, looked at negatively, they're often cast as enforcing a system of terrible inequality, where there really isn't, opportunity for most people, that it's, very unfair. Then of course, on the other side, on the liberal side, in the ideal, they cast themselves as supporting, equality of opportunity as well, but through, pushing down the inequalities. And of course, their cast, their sort of monster version is people who want to just make everybody equal and destroy all exceptionalism. So a good question is how do we find what is the appropriate balance between, sort of freedom to excel, and which also is the freedom to, have terrible, or I don't know, well, that's kind of begging the question, having a great deal of inequality. And again, the election coming up will address some of that stuff. Now, another question is, of course, is there inequality today?
Is there inequality?
Yeah, does it exist?
Yes.
What kinds exist?
Racial.
Social.
Yeah, racial and social. How do we know there's inequality? Yeah, what would be some examples that tell us that inequality exists?
I mean,
African Americans make up about 15% of the population, make up, most of the prison population in the United States.
There's gender inequality where a female only gets 70 cents to a man's dollar. And wages are 78.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, somewhere between 70, 78. Yeah, so but a lower percentage. Any other examples?
Crack is punished harder than cocaine.
Yeah, yeah. They had when they had the sentencing, because crack is basically cocaine.
Yeah.
So it'd be kind of like punishing people,
For lesser.
more. Yeah, it's like you have oh look, you have a snow cone. We'll punish you harsher than someone who has, say, a melted snow cone, for example, for that offense. Yeah, so they can. Yeah, I mean, crack is it's basically baked cocaine, kind of. Not that I know a lot of drugs. Yeah, so you got to pay for grad school somehow. I'm sorry, it's $6 Those gangster days are behind you. Yeah, so we do. Yeah, we have disparities in punishments for people. Similar crimes have harsher punishments. One of the issues that's big today is policing. Is the way people are treated by the police unfair in many cases, or some cases?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the incidents, well, what's a recent incident that has got people once again discussing whether policing is,
The SRO officer in school.
yeah, where they look pretty, I mean, I'm not an expert on school discipline, but that seems like a fairly harsh way to deal with someone who's just, being a little uncooperative. Yeah, and people are making, so you make the claim, well, it's excessive, but it's not a race thing. And people say, well, it pretty clearly is.
Did you see the video of the white cop throwing the girl on the floor in classroom and dragging her across the
Yes. Yeah, I did see that video, and many of the other videos. Well, it's a lot. I mean, that's kind of horrifying. I mean, that's an argument that shows too, disparity. Yeah, and so there is the question about the legal system as well. Well, that brings us to the end of our stuff today. And so next time we'll pick up with some more inequality.